God. I don't even know if you exist. I like to think you do. I don't even know how much power you've got. I like to think you've got power. I can't live like this. So if you do exist, take my life or take away this hunger, this thirst for drugs, because I can't do this anymore. And I took a hit of crack cocaine, and you would imagine that would keep me awake for quite a while. I call it God put me to sleep, and I fell asleep on crack cocaine, which is pretty difficult. And I woke up about 4 minutes past 12 on the 27th of June 2014, and I haven't missed a day since.
Wow.
I woke up with this addiction that I've been fighting for years, on and off. And I woke up with no one to use, and I didn't.
Wow.
No withdrawal, nothing. I woke up and I haven't used a day since.
Hey guys, the Jesus Magnet is now partnering with Witness merch. They've even got a Jesus Magnet tab on their site with our merchandise. Let's check out their video.
At Witness Merch, we're more than just a store. We're part of your faith journey.
Our mission is simple: to provide affordable and accessible Christian merch so you can wear your faith proudly.
Not only do we have a range of trendy Christian merch and gifts, but we also offer customization to reflect your faith.
And above all, every purchase helps gift God's word to others, spreading the gospel message wherever you go.
You gotta live it, you gotta love it. Testimony goes on and on and on. It's magnetic, it's prophetic, it's God's stories being told.
Welcome back to the Jesus Magnet podcast. I'm your host, Joel, all the way from New Zealand, and today we have Jack Gregory in the house, and he is coming all the way from England, and he is the host of Live and Undrugged. Live and Live. Man, I read them exactly the same words, but Live and Undrugged, or is it Live? Live and Undrugged. And he's also known as the accidental journalist, and he's come on the show. He's got an incredible testimony, all about, some pretty hardcore stuff about being trafficked, a little bit about prison, and even encountering some serious spiritual demonic encounters, potentially going all the way down to, was it hell? Is that right?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I'm excited.
Yeah.
To hear about this. It freaks me out hearing this sort of stuff, and it's quite a good fear to have, one that kind of keeps you in check. But yeah, Jack, I'm really keen to have your story on the show. All of our listeners will be really excited to hear this. So yeah, Jack, let's just pass it over to you. I would love you to start, maybe give our listeners a brief overview of your life before and after encountering Christ. But let's have a focus on those transformative moments.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be able to share my story internationally. I do have a heart for getting out of England and sharing it on an international stage, which is why I love like podcasting and things like that, because it gives me the ability to speak to people all over the world from my garden shed, which is where I am right now. My name is Jack Gregory, and I'm now a journalist. I qualified as a journalist last year. Before that, my life was difficult to say the least. So I will start right at the very beginning, if that's all right.
Yep.
And then we'll move on through. Because it's all kind of
all connected,
it's all relevant, all connected. I should say, we are not our stories, but our stories do make us what we are as men, as women, as followers of Christ, because they become a tool to be able to help transform other people's lives and bring Christ to where he is needed. So I grew up. I was born in Scotland, in Glasgow in the 1970s, and moved to England when I was 6 months old with my mum, who was I believe 16 or 17 at the time. She wasn't very old. She had some mental health issues, what we now know to be mental health issues. And I never knew my mum up until just a few short years ago. I was raised in a home in a mining community in the north of England, in God's own county, Yorkshire. And the thing about Yorkshire was that it was the hub for industry. So we had cotton mills and steel mills, and but it was mainly coal mines. So I grew up in a mining community, a very Christian orientated mining community, a community within a community that kind of everybody knew everybody's business. It was a mining town and a market town that was surrounded by 5 other market towns and mining towns, hence it was known as part of 5 towns. And in the early 1980s, 1984, I guess, our Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, in her wisdom, decided that it would be cheaper to buy coal from France and South Africa and other places. So the mines began to go downhill. They began to strike. Anybody that crossed the striking line were classed as, we were called a scab. I was brought up around union men.
So is this your family that are the miners, or you're actually mining at this time?
No, this is my family. My whole family that grew up in a mining town.
Yeah.
My dad never left his hometown.
Yeah.
Not really. I mean, he's travelled the world when he was younger, but he loves his hometown. My mum, my adoptive parents, my mum was what's called the domiciliary, like a social worker for old people, and my dad was a railwayman who worked on the railway for 35 years. So we didn't really have the problems that some of the other families did within the town. My mum and dad were very kind with other people. My dad would paint the houses of the old people. He would do any odd jobs that needed doing. They were known throughout the town. I was always the shy kid, the quiet kid, the weird kid, the one that didn't quite fit in, and I never knew why. I was quite physically weak, and I was meek, and I just didn't get on with other people socially. I now know that to be neurodivergent. There was no such thing as that when I was growing up.
What do you mean by that?
So when I was a kid, I was classed as not very bright. I was called stupid a lot. I didn't understand a lot of things, and the things that I did understand were way beyond. I always had a good affinity for words, and I always saw the world in words, but I didn't know what these words were because I couldn't read all right. So they called me slow.
Right.
They called me thick. There was no real word for dyslexic.
Yep.
There was no such thing as ADHD, ADD. Autism was way on the scale of, being non-verbal and stuff like that. And it wasn't really understood. So I was just treated like I was a bit thick, a bit dim.
Yeah.
I love my mum and dad, nice house. I can't say any different. It was they were very loving. And I got spoiled a lot as a kid. So I found out I was adopted. I had my 8th birthday party that day, and I was filled with pop and sweets and platters of cakes and scones and buns, and it was lovely. Every sort of Yorkshire mum did this at the time, tea and kind of like high tea for poor people. But and then I remember being sat on my mum's knee and at night, and my dad sat on the sofa in his white vest. I remember it vividly, reading his paper, and looking over. And my mum is a staunch woman. She can be very, very hard-nosed, like a lot older Yorkshire women can be. But she had this tear in her eye, and I'd never seen it before. Never seen it after, not really. And she said, we love you, right? And I'm like, well, we'll always be your mum and dad. Yeah, but you're adopted. They explained what adoption was, that my real mum couldn't look after me, and that I went to them when I was younger, and I thrived with them, so they adopted me and I became their son.
Wow. At what age were you adopted?
So I was adopted at 8. I was taken away from my biological mother at 18 months old.
Wow, just a baby.
And yeah, so I was fostered all that time and I didn't know. So she, my mum is the only mum I ever really knew, up until relatively recently. So
that's amazing.
I broke.
How did you grasp that new information as an 8-year-old? I didn't
handle it well at all. I guess for a lot of people, it would be a positive thing. They've got a family that love them. But for me and the way that I thought, it wasn't that I was loved by someone. It was that I was abandoned by someone else. So I got this fear of abandonment. And I guess I broke. That's when I broke. That's when it went dark. It started to go dark for me. Because I didn't understand. I had this existential crisis at 8. Didn't know who I was. I only knew what my real mum's first name was and last name, and that was it. And that was born in Scotland. I didn't know anything else. So I began to lie as a way to cope. I began to create these own worlds in my head. I stole, I played up, I had real anger issues. I managed 4 years in middle school and a year in high school before they took me out and put me into special school. Not just because of my behaviour, because I learned differently. I didn't know that then. So I really struggled with the learning. So they put me into the special school system, which is really when it started getting a lot worse for me. My family, I wouldn't exactly call my family Christian. They would call themselves Christian. We come from a Christian background in a Christian town. My grandfather and his parents came over from Pennsylvania. They were Quakers.
Wow.
They came over with the Quaker movement into Yorkshire, into the mines and stuff like that to work. So the American on that side, and a very good work ethic. And I got some of that because I had a love of money, but I couldn't turn my head too much apart from stories that I would create. I had, and the teachers would ask me, where I'd been on my holiday, and I'd say something absolutely stupid. I'd seen on The Simpsons the night before, like the principal that served in Vietnam, and he was in Da Nang, and I'd heard Da Nang, so I said, Da Nang, and just these absolutely ridiculous lies. And I would get really offended when I would get called upon it. But I guess that's when there were certain people that saw me as bait, saw me as an easy target. And that's when I started to be trafficked and abused. And the way that I saw it was while they were doing it to me, they weren't doing it to someone else.
What do you mean by trafficked and abused? Was that in school, by people in school?
It was in school. I won't say who it was.
No.
I will say they were adults, and it was a network of them.
Wow.
And I was passed around. I was told that, because I told so many lies, if I told anybody,
they didn't believe you.
Nobody would ever believe me.
Yeah.
So I fell into it, and I got cigarettes, and they gave me cigarettes and things and money and stuff like that. I was making money on dinner times anyway. This was back in the day of VHS, and I was really good. I had 2 VHS players, and I'd worked out that I could copy one from another, and I was knocking copies out, bootleg VHS. I was doing it the same with the.
So is
we
that
had this thing called the Chart Show.
is that old school pirating?
Old school piracy, yeah. We had this thing called the Chart Show on a Sunday that I used to record off the radio and pause the breaks for people, and then make copies and sell them.
Oh, smart.
One of the first CDs that I got hold of that I was able to copy was Fat of the Land, Prodigy. So you're talking around about 1990, 1, 2, 3, somewhere like that. And I was good. I was a runner. I was good at running. I could run far. I was captain of the cross-country team.
Yeah.
And the school that I was in was a mile anywhere to different parts of the town. And I could do that, and I could run VHS and, make a lot of money.
Wow, so you're making money as like a teenager.
I was making money as a teenager. I was getting money from these people. I didn't know it was trafficking back then, and I only found out, and realised that it was trafficking over these past few years. I'll get to that in a little while. But, so I was being passed around from adult to adult. And
where were you in, like, your spiritual walk with God? Because you had gone down a dark path, realizing that you were adopted and feeling abandoned. And you said you were raised in a Christian home. Did you have a concept of a heavenly Father that loved you unconditionally?
Well, no. I mean, they would call themselves Christians because that's what you do for forms and things like that. And they called themselves good people, and they were, still. But it wasn't really a church family. I did skate into church, when I was younger, and I was baptized, and I tried to get on. There was this really cool Anglican vicar, Church of England vicar, called Jeff Cotell, and he was a great guy, and I went to the church, and it was nice. This was when the sort of, I guess, the new radical movement was kind of taking off. And it was quite a forward-thinking church. Went to a few Christian festivals and stuff, and lived a life where I wore masks. I would act one way and be another way.
Yeah, just a facade. Yeah,
a facade. Yeah, I left school at 16. With no qualifications because it was a special school. It was a school that rewarded bad behaviour with really good things like going away on weekends, caving and climbing and abseiling, canoeing, and all these really fun things that I learned to do very well. Some of them I became really apt at teaching.
Yeah.
I didn't do any exams. The only certificates I've got from school are a certificate on changing a fuse in a plug, riding a 50cc motorcycle, and answering a private telephone.
Wow.
They saw it as they were preparing you for
life,
unemployment, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
Or manual labour, which was that, and I never really wanted to do manual labour. I had a few jobs. I did a milk round and 2 paper rounds. I had a good head for making money. I liked money, so it was nice to have money. And my parents, they got me whatever I needed. So, but when I left school, I couldn't hold down a job.
Yeah.
I'd found drink and drugs. I would say that I believed in a God of my limited understanding at the time.
But there was no relationship, there was no prayer life, there was nothing like that.
I would act one way in church and another way at home and another way out on the street. That's the way it was.
Yeah, yeah. So what actually brought you to the encounter with Christ? Like, when did that start to change?
That was a long life.
A long way away.
A long life. Yeah, that was a long life. So, I left home at 17, moved into a flat in the town I went to school in.
Yeah.
And got into drink and drugs and, lies and lots of sexual relationships with lots of different women, and that became part of my life. I tried dipping my toes in other religions. I was Buddhist for a little while, and I had a lot of friends that I went to school with initially before I was put into special school that were Muslim. And Yorkshire is a big hub for Muslims, or was back then, still is, with Bradford being the main city that had all the mosques and things. So I tried that, became a Muslim for a little while, and became a con man, really. I was making money running long cons out of the city, making money, drinking, doing whatever I could, lots of drugs.
And as a child, being a pathological liar from those early years, did that carry on through right into the young adult years?
It carried on through up until I got sober this time, really, I guess, if I'm being honest.
If I'm not lying.
Yeah. I have to be as relatively honest as I can be with other people and myself. There are some things that I can't talk about that I struggle with, but I try to be as open and honest as I can. It was a few dark years. I then moved away. 1999, did a complete move down the other end of the country, down to the south of England, to a place called Portsmouth, because I'd lost my best friend. He was a mentor. He lived in the flat above me and a couple to the side. He was the first person to get me sober. He locked me in his spare bedroom and sat in there. I'm 6'2". I was 6'2". He was 6'4", 6'5", and 25, 6 stone.
Wow!
Absolutely beastly guy, but gentle, really gentle. And he locked me in his spare bedroom, and he got me sober with a bucket. He put locks on the doors, wouldn't leave. Tried to make me eat and wiped the sick away from my face, and just got me sober for the first time. And I managed to stay sober for quite a while. He started to teach me to read and write. I always had a head for poetry. I love poetry, and I've always loved poetry. So my first book was a poetry book, and I wrote poems about things that I lived. So I started to learn to read and write then, really. I got most of my education, a little bit more down the road, when I got myself into a bit of trouble legally. But I had all this trauma that I didn't know was trauma. So this fear of abandonment and all these things that happened to me in the school environment. I had family that really didn't want to know me because I was adopted. And I had family that just put up with me, and some ridiculed me and some were great. And I loved my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. She was, I would stay at hers at weekend, and it was. But I just started to fall into this slum, and I knew I needed to get away. After I got out, so I moved to Portsmouth. You're talking 200-300 mile away.
Yeah.
Right on the south coast of England. And that's when I first found recovery. I got into something called the Cranston Project, which was like a cafe environment that focused on recovery, but they also used holistic things like massage and acupuncture and things like that. They were very forward thinking in relapse prevention and what we now know to be trauma therapy and things like that. And I got sober 2001, and I'd had a few times sober and I'd relapsed and things like that. But then I got sober in 2001. I was told by my caseworker that if I got to 30 days sober, he would take me to a film set, because I've always had an affinity for films, because he had a brother that was working on a British film. And I did, and he took me out, and it was great. And then I joined up on this thing called the Prince's Trust, which was run by the Hanel King, the Prince of Wales. It was a volunteer program that taught you basically how to start businesses and stuff like, they took us away doing things like abseiling and climbing and stuff, but they also taught us how to go out and get jobs and things like that. So, part of that program, I got a job in a club called the Edge of the Wedge, at the Wedgwood Rooms in Portsmouth. This was a big venue for comedy, and they had people like Lee Evans and Adam Hills when he first started the circuit, and I was learning sound teching, and I got to 6 months sober and it was great, and didn't really have a God. I guess I believed in him. I had a God of my own understanding. I was working 12-step programs, going to meetings and things like that, which was recommended, and I stayed sober for a few years. I met a woman in Norfolk. I moved here in 2000, at the end of 2001, mid to the end of 2001. 6 months, 7 months sober, and I stayed sober for a few years until I started chasing dreams. I wrote a film that was based on my life. It got some attention. I was in and out of churches, and I used them for what I needed to my own end. I'm not proud of it. They helped me with food and things like that. They helped me do what I needed to do. I wouldn't have called myself religious. I knew a God of my own understanding, and that was just about it. And then I wrote this film, and it started garnering some attention with the mainstream in London, and I fell into that life again. I thought, just start with a drink, it'd be all right drinking. And then I was doing that. I was debt collecting as well, doing drugs with my boss. And then it just led me down to a slippery slope, lying to my wife, lying to everybody, lying to myself, trying to pretend that I was sober. I wore this mask of sobriety for years.
Man.
I was going to meetings and I was using,
Wow.
but I didn't see myself as bad as some of the other people, because there were people at some of these meetings that were selling drugs in the car park. And I'm like, well, I'm not like that. I'm just doing a bit of treatment. I was kind of trying to justify my choices.
Yeah.
My marriage ended, and I ended up sofa surfing. I'd become a member of a church, a local church in our city that became very cultish, and it felt, in retrospect, felt very cultish. This was a church that focused on worship in the dark. They would have bass speakers pointing to the floor and play bass and drums at a double heartbeat. And, I now see this as what they were doing, where they were faking encounters, trying to make people, faking in encounters with the Holy Spirit. And that saddens me.
How did they achieve that?
So there's this thing called neuro-linguistic programming, using beats, sounds, words, patterns of speech to create an atmosphere. So pointing a powerful bass speaker to make the floor vibrate in a dark room where all you can see is a stage, and playing certain beats to mimic heartbeat, and then it gets faster and faster, so it makes your heartbeat go faster and faster, and it creates a certain belief structure. So it's basically faking
An encounter
with the Holy Spirit, and that saddens me now. I've met the Holy Spirit. I meet the Holy Spirit pretty much daily. I love my relationship with Christ, but that put me off. It did put me off. But I had this belief, and I wouldn't even say it was a belief. I knew God existed. To me, I knew God existed, but he just really didn't care.
Yeah.
And I went from church to church to church. And yeah, I ended up homeless. I ended up on what's called county lines, which is the drug business outside of London. They take it into the towns and cities outside of London, and you get indebted. And I found myself as a vulnerable person, stuck on county lines as a drug addict.
Yeah.
I'd tried suicide several times and failed.
Yeah.
I lost several friends to suicide, which really affected me as well. I lost quite a few people to overdoses, six funerals in 7 days. I just found myself in absolute despair. I pretty much lost everything, and I found myself. I was going to a local food bank coffee morning on a Friday morning, just to be able to eat something and have tea and biscuits and stuff. And on one of those mornings, I was met by this lady who had this really big smile, and she was like, what can I get you? And I'm like, I can have a cup of coffee. And we got talking. I had a Doctor Who t-shirt on, and she's like, I love Doctor Who. And we got talking about Doctor Who, and she had a young baby, only a few weeks old, and her husband had left her, and she was living in she'd just got a place out here, but she up until then she'd been kind of living in sheltered accommodation. So we got talking, and she was really nice, and she, despite being told not to, she took me out for a meal, bought me stuff to eat, bought me tobacco, and was just really nice. And then I didn't see her again for months. This was February, and I didn't see her again for months. I lost a few members of my family. We'd lost my uncle, and I went home. I'd had a relationship with my real family, my biological family.
Really?
For a few years. I built a relationship with my mum, and my sister, and my brother, and my aunties and that. But a lot of my bad behaviour was enabled up there. What's called council estates and sheltered housing and things. And
can I ask what it was like?
Accommodation.
Can I ask what it was like to meet your biological family?
It was great. It was kind of a whirlwind. It was after my daughter was born, and I decided that I wanted to find out at least what had happened to me.
Yeah. Really.
So I put the feelers out there, and we had this program called Jeremy Kyle at the time. It was a talk show like Britain's answer to Jerry Springer, I guess.
Yeah.
But he did a lot of adoption specials and that, and I'd seen an adoption special, and so I just put it out there, and who my mum was, what her name was. It was quite quick. My phone number was passed on, and I got a phone call from a man called Richard, who was my biological mum's best friend, and he said to me, you see, my Christian name is William, and he said, is this William? And I said, well, yeah, but not many people call me that. And he's like, is it William Bissett? And I'm like, I've been called Bissett since I was a baby, mate. And he's like, I've got your mum here. And I cried, and I've been looking after my baby that morning, and I ran upstairs with the baby in my arms, and I put her in my then wife's arms, and I broke down, and I said, I've just spoken to my mum. My wife at the time did what most people do. She took me for a fry-up, a full English breakfast to kind of get my head straight. And so then I spoke to her later on that day, and I spoke to my aunts, and it was great. And I'd arranged to go up, and I went up and I started building a relationship. But then, I was back on my old stomping ground. My mum and dad didn't like the fact that I was honest, but they didn't like the fact that I'd had a relationship, and I can see why. They didn't speak to me for years.
Your adoptive parents didn't like the fact that you... Wow.
Yeah, I didn't speak to them, to be honest, either. I found my mum hard work. But, so I had this relationship, but there was a lot of enabling, so a lot of drinking and drugs up there, and I just fell into it again, and that, it all just turned to poop. Like I say, then I met this woman called Jo, and in February, and I didn't see her for months, and I was going to meetings, and things were just going from bad to worse, and I found myself. I'd had some time sober, had about a year, I think, maybe, a year at one point, and on and off. And I ended up sitting in a crack house, 26th of June 2014. And I'm sat in this crack house, 10 o'clock at night. I had this pipe in my hand, and I'm like, God, I don't even know if you exist. I like to think you do. I don't even know how much power you've got. I like to think you've got power. I can't live like this. So if you do exist, take my life or take away this hunger, this thirst for drugs, because I can't do this anymore. And I took a hit of crack cocaine, and you would imagine that would keep me awake for quite a while. I call it God put me to sleep, and I fell asleep on crack cocaine, which is pretty difficult. And I woke up at about 4 minutes past 12 on the 27th of June 2014, and I haven't used a day since.
Wow.
I woke up with this addiction that I've been fighting for years, on and off. And I woke up with no want to use, and I didn't.
Wow. An instant, no withdrawals?
No withdrawal, nothing. I woke up, and I haven't used a day since. And still, that wasn't enough then. It wasn't enough then. God took away that, and I was like, God exists, he exists, he exists. Jesus exists, he exists. Do I want a relationship with him? Well, no, because that means I've got to be good. It means I can't be naughty, or at least have the option to be naughty. So I was going to a church, and I was like, praise God, I'd got sober. I started seeing Jo in the September time, I guess. We got married in 2019. We've been together 10 years this year, married 5. And it was great. Everything was fantastic. I'd found a church, and I was like, God is good. God is great. Yeah, come on.
And you're sober.
Part of the church.
Yeah.
And I was sober, but I was skinny, 6'1", 6'2". I couldn't really put any weight on. I still smoked. And it was, it was great. I moved in with Jo and her, her kids, and it was going good. It was going good. And then in February 2015, I started to get ill. I'd got this cough that I just couldn't get rid of. I'd gone down to about 8 and 9 stone at one point, which wasn't very heavy. And I was just losing more and more and more weight. I ended up in hospital with some stomach problems, in and out, and this cough, it just wouldn't go away. It wouldn't go away for months and months, and I ended up, I remember it was 19th of March 2015, sorry. And I was just really ill. I hadn't slept properly. I couldn't breathe properly. My breathing was really shallow. It hurt. I picked my daughter up from her mum's, and 2 minutes down the road, I had to sit down because I lost every bit of breath in my body. It just all expelled from my mouth. It was like a...
Wow.
And I tried just going through, surviving on prayer and paracetamol, still not taking Christ into my life, not saying those words, not wanting to say those words.
Because you wanted the option to walk in the world. Is that right?
Yeah. I want
it's
to
amazing.
walk in the world.
Just the option to. I find that amazing. A mindset sort of like, I'm at a crossroads and I'm just standing there and I know which way I should go, but I'm just going to stand in the middle for a little while.
Yeah.
I find that amazing that you just stood there for so long, knowing which way you should go. But you wanted the option to go the other way, not even just in case, but you just wanted the option. You still wanted to follow Christ, but you wanted the option.
Yeah. Not that I really wanted to be naughty, I just wanted the option because I didn't want to be...
You see how ridiculous it is now?
I do. I was talking about this at church this morning. But it's like, so I couldn't breathe. I had this metallic taste in my throat. I managed a bacon sandwich the next morning. That's all I'd eaten in really weeks. I was 6 stone 6 ounces. To put that into perspective, my 10-year-old nearly weighs that.
Oh, wow.
You're, I guess, about 75, 76 pounds. Not very heavy at all.
Wow.
There's quite a prolific picture of me sat in my hospital bed taken by a guy called Jim Mottram, who's a photographer that runs this thing called Small Town Inertia, where he photographs people that have been through the mill, or struggling like financially and stuff due to the austerity of what we're going through in Britain at the minute, and what we have been going through in Britain since we've had a Conservative government, and it's been really hard. Sorry, I digress. I found myself in hospital. I couldn't breathe. I got to the hospital around about, I guess, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon to the A&E. My ex-wife took me, so I could give my daughter a kiss and tell her everything was going to be all right. By 7:30 that night, I was dead. I had tuberculosis, pleurisy, some environmental disease that I hadn't seen for about 50 years, double lung failure. I had ulcers in my mouth, so I couldn't eat or speak properly. I lost 50% of my muscle mass. I'd had a job until, I got myself a job. I was writing policies for a company. I'd had a good life.
Yeah.
I started to build myself a good life. And then it all came tumbling down. And I died.
Yeah, walk me through what the death part was like.
So, before I go into that, I want to say Christ does not send you to hell. God does not send you to hell. That's not in their character. We send ourselves there.
Yeah. We're on the way there already. Yeah. That's why Christ came.
Yeah. I had what's called a hypoxia because the oxygen wasn't getting to my brain. I stopped breathing. I'd been screaming. I began to think that the police were holding an investigation behind the door, and they had cameras on me, and everybody that came in they were either androids or some sort of clone, or it was really good disguise makeup. Because I had so much guilt from the life that I'd led, so much guilt, so much shame, so much trauma, so much hurt, so many lies, so much hurt. And I began screaming, and then went just completely quiet. I'm told I went completely quiet and mute, couldn't speak, and I died. About 7:20 that night, I died for 4 minutes, and all I remember was screaming at a poor orderly because I thought it was a policeman trying to poke the dying python, basically, poke the dying bear to get a bite, screaming, and I died. It went black for a moment, and I remember this sound in the background kind of chilling to the bone when I hear it now still, and it's like an old air raid siren. I now know it's because I was on the intensive care high dependency unit. I was in what's called a negative pressure room, which means it's pulling out any sort of bad bugs from the environment and pushing them through a filtered system, and I'm getting a good air in the thing, the big heavy door, and anybody that came in in contagion masks. Yeah. This is 2015, not 2020. This is 2015. People, nurses in full contagion masks, people that came to see me in masks and
full hazmat suit.
It was awful. It was absolutely awful. But I died, and I heard this noise in the background as well. It was, and I know that was a life support machine in the room next door. I've just been back to the hospital and visited it. I'm good friends with the nurse that took care of me as well. And I thought that was people dying, that I had this super virulent form of tuberculosis that I'd spread to people that was killing people very, very quickly. People were dying outside my room. I'd caused the apocalypse, and God, just because I was such a bad person, God ended the world. So I died thinking that And I woke up in this, I can't say hell was fire and brimstone because it wasn't. It was like watching an old TV, being used to watching 4K and then going back to watching an old TV. There was kind of a dark filter over my eyes. I was being teased by this voice telling me that I was evil, that I wasn't good enough. I was being persecuted by these demons, I guess, demons. And Satan, and I believe that not even he wanted me. So I was that bad a person.
And what could you see?
It was empty. The hospital was empty. I walked around the hospital. There was no one there.
Wow. And you could hear the voices, though?
I could hear the voices, like, condemning me. But I managed to get out of the room. I don't even remember opening the door. But I got out of the room and there was nobody there. And then I managed to get off the ward and it was empty and there was nothing but, like, gurneys with bodies covered. And I managed to get out vividly. I managed to get out the exact way that you do go out. I know that hospital like the back of my hand. The exact way that you go out to be, to get out. I got out and the sky was dark and these air raid sirens were going, another million dead. There were bodies in the car park where the cars should be, just burning. There was this insidious laughter at the back of my head. It seemed like it was everywhere. It was frightening and it felt like months. I didn't eat. I didn't need to eat, anything like that. And I became very, very lonely. It was a solitary place.
What do you mean it felt like months?
It felt like months. Every room I walked into, I would see a different part of my life.
So you were there in your perspective for months? Wow.
Yes.
So time...
Watching my life, watching every mistake, every lie, every crime, everything that I ever did wrong.
So time seemed to operate differently when you did?
Differently.
Wow.
Differently. I now know to be 4 minutes or so, but it felt like months. So when I came back, I broke.
Yeah.
I clung on to this apocalypse, and I had what I now call a very personal apocalypse. And, I believed that the world was going to end, and there were people outside the door that wanted to do serious harm to me because of what I'd done to the world. God was no longer listening. I've been going to a church called Hope. It's my home church now. But the lead elder, Grantley Watkins, he came to pray for my soul. And I remember having this conversation with him because, they'd lost me once and they were told they were going to lose me again. So he wanted to pray for my soul. And I remember just saying, God doesn't care. He's not listening. He's not listening to anybody. He's left. God's left the building. He's left he's ending. Grantley's a very jolly man. He had a little chuckle. And then just prayed for my soul and left. He was the only one that wouldn't come in with contagion gear because he didn't want to scare me. That's a brave man.
Wow.
It just got worse and worse. But there was this one young Asian doctor. I didn't really know her face, but I knew she was there. And I don't know what it's like at your hospitals, but our hospitals, you're not allowed to share your faith. You're allowed to wear a cross, but you're not allowed to show it. I do a lot of these in the States, and they tell me that they pray with their doctors, which blew my mind. But they're not. But she would come in and she would let me see this cross. I don't really remember her face, but she wasn't very tall, but I remember this cross, and I remember this smile. And then when she'd hear somebody coming in, she'd cover it up and then walk out. I believe that to be one of God's angels that He sent. One of His human angels. And that's when the miracles really started to happen. I'd been given this drug that was causing, it was an anti-infection drug, but it was causing auditory hallucinations, auditory things where I was hearing voices and stuff like that. And it was just I had this rash. It felt like they'd burnt me with a towel. Just when they would put me into the bed, they had this towel as a barrier, so they didn't needlessly touch me. And this drug, as soon as it hit my system, it felt like it had burned me from there to my torso, and I had this rash. It was really painful. It would bleed. It was like I thought that they'd burnt my skin with acid.
Oh.
It wasn't good. And none of the doctors would really come in because they didn't know how I would be. There was one doctor, Dr. Twentyman, and I say his name for a reason because he's a big part of my story and my journey with God. But I was hurting. I wouldn't speak to my girlfriend at the time. I wouldn't speak to my daughter. I tried having a conversation with her on Skype, and I just thought that my ex-wife was mocking me. They were using her as a puppet. I thought she died. I thought that this thing had killed her. I was mentally messed up. I was just gone. And
yeah, how did you grasp back to reality, I suppose, after going through something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it was weeks, and it was weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, that I was in this madness. Like I say, the nurses would come in and like, don't shout, don't scream, just please. And I'm laying in my bed, and there'd been this presence at the bottom of my bed for a few weeks, and it didn't feel like any of the other presences. It felt a bit calmer and a bit nicer. And I was in this madness, and I guess I'd had enough. And I said, "Who are you?" A bit more colourfully, I might add, with a few swear words in there. And this audible voice came back and said, "You know who I am." I'm like, right, okay. So what have I got to do to not be in this hell anymore? Because I can't do this anymore. Well, you know what you've got to do. And I'm like, okay. And I've been in recovery enough to know this saying, surrender to win. Sometimes we have to surrender so we can carry on fighting our battles at a later date. So I said, okay, Jesus, that's who I presume you are, Jesus Christ, I take you into my life right now. I'm sorry for the life that I've led. I don't want to live like this anymore. I take you into my life right now. Please deliver me from this pain. And it was like this darkness fell from my eyes, and I could see normally again. And I looked around in the room, and I was aware of my environment. I looked at these skinny little things called legs, I could barely move, but I was sat up in bed. I wouldn't eat. I kept pulling my feeding tube out and stuff. And this nurse came in. Her name is Jackie, and I'm sat up in my bed, and she's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Can I have a wash, please?" And she's like, "Just 1 minute," and goes running out the door. And moments later, 4 doctors come running in, and I'm like, "I just want to wash. I feel dirty. I want to wash." So they bring me in this bowl and sponge. This is a second miracle. And I take this sponge and I start to wash myself. And this really painful rash that I'd had started to peel away.
Wow.
By the time I'd finished washing, it was gone.
Wow.
I have genuine medical people that will attest to that.
Wow.
It went within minutes. My specialist was called, Dr. Twentyman, and he came and he checked me over and was like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "I'm really sorry for the way that I may have treated you. I've really been struggling mentally. I've been really fighting. I've just met Jesus. I've just accepted him into my life. And now I just want to get better." And he smiled. And like I say, I'd had a job when I was in there. I'd got made redundant while I was in the hospital. The company folded, so I got a little bit of redundancy money and a little bit of pay. And they said, "If you get back up to 8 stone, you can leave." This is mid-April, a week or 2 into April, maybe 2 weeks into April. And I took it as a challenge. People from the church will come in and visit me. They've been praying for me. They've been putting me up on the projector every week and praying for me and praying for my soul. And people would come in and visit me, and they would take back these stories of what was happening. But yeah, so I they would bring me in sweets and tins of spam, and there's nothing more glorious than the smell of a hospital ward when the nurses are so happy that you're eating, they're cooking you spam so you can snack on it in the hospital. I would have their breakfast, an hour later I would go down for a full English. I would come back up, I would eat sweets and chocolate up until lunchtime. I would have their lunch. An hour later I'd get another one. Tea time, the same thing. And then around about 7 o'clock, there was a local pizza place that would deliver pizza to me, 2 for 1 for a tenner. And I was buying a 12-inch pizza for myself and a 12-inch pizza for the nurses.
Awesome.
And, you know, so we were having pizza every night. The last night I ran out of money and Jackie came in. She went, "We've had a whip round, so you can have your pizza tonight." Never known any nurse do that for anybody, but it was fantastic. I started praising God, and I a few days before my stepboy's birthday, I was allowed out.
Awesome.
I guess around about April the 30th, I got out. Started going to church on a Sunday. I made the decision to get baptized, and you know, my wife came with me and the kids. I was getting baptized alongside some of the other people within the church. A couple of young people, and one guy by the name of Will Twentyman. And we walked in, and my then girlfriend, my wife, she nudged me and she said, "Isn't that your specialist?" And I looked at him and I went, "Hello." And he said, "That's so good to see you." I'm like, "Did you know I was getting baptized?" "No, my son, that's my son, William. Yeah, he's getting baptized alongside you."
Wow.
So God put me in the room, you know, on a similar Christian, on a Christian journey with the son of the man that saved my life.
Wow.
Or helped save my life. And it just started to go from there, really. I started on what's called an Alpha course. I don't know if you have them over there, but it's a course where we learn about Christ, and we have a meal, and then we watch videos, and then we discuss what we've seen on the video. And I did that. I've done 21 up to a few years ago. Led a few. I became a member of a thing called the School of Supernatural Life, which is run by the elders of the former lead elder of my church, Brantley.
Yeah.
And I've been doing that a few years, and that's teaching you how to live a life that is so naturally supernatural and supernaturally natural. And it's just, I went from this meek guy that took Christ into his life one day after living a complete and utter bonfire of a life, to discipling, praying for the sick, healing the sick, bringing words of prophecy, and the school teaches and things like that. I'm now on the core team of the school, helping teach.
Wow.
And it's absolutely fantastic. We've got a church that are so supportive. They paid for our wedding.
Wow.
They gifted us our wedding. We had it at a local registry office, but here you're not even allowed to mention the word God in the registry office. So they gifted us. We got married on the Thursday, and then on the Saturday, they gave us a blessing at the church, and then supplied the room. They got a bar in for people. Fish and chip. We had a fish and chip van, and they gave us a blessing, and they've just been so kind to us over the years. We've had some hard times, austerity wise. We live on faith sometimes, a lot of the time. When it comes to money. So part, I'll try and wind it up a little bit now, but part of the journey that I'm on now is that at the School of Supernatural Life, I guess it was my second year in there. So you're talking about 2016. And so 4 people brought this prophecy. I'd always wanted to get involved with film, but I sort of resigned myself to the fact that it was never going to happen because it just led me into a bad environment. And but people kept bringing me this prophecy saying, and they didn't necessarily know each other, and they were like, God's going to, not yet, but God's going to really put you in a situation where you're going to bring Christ to the broken in a way that you love, in a creative way. You're going to have a career in film, but not the way that you expected.
Yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, okay, right, okay. Let's pray about this. We do life group during the weeks, so it's we meet and have meals together and pray together, and worship together. So I took this to the life group. God put on my heart that there were so many voiceless people out there, and that they need a voice. And people kept bringing me this same prophecy, just in different ways. So I said, what can I do? What can I do? I got involved with a trafficking site on Facebook, and spoke to a few people. And then I thought, well, I want to write a book. I'd already written my first book. I'd supplied poetry for a few books about a guy that I grew up with, who was kind of famous for being a bad lad. And then I wrote my first book, A Personal Apocalypse, which is basically the poetry that I'd written through my life and some of the explanations through it, and how it sort of brought me to Christ. And it was basically my story. And then I knew I wanted to do something to be a voice, so I wrote Between the Streetlights and Red Lights. I wanted to bring the stories of those that have been trafficked. And during learning these stories, that's when I realised that what happened to me, I started to piece together that actually I was trafficked. I thought it was just straight up abuse, but I wasn't. I was passed from person to person to person. So I was trafficked. And I began to deal with it. And then I got a phone call from a friend of mine who said, I'm working on a film out here in Norfolk. This is kind of a hub away from London. There's a couple of studios here where I live, a few towns over and in the city. And she said, I've got a director that is doing a film called The Souvenir, starring Tilda Swinton and a couple of other people, Tom Burke. And she wants to talk to somebody. It's about addiction. She wants to talk to an addict. Would you go out there and speak to her? We'll pay for your travel expenses and, just give her a bit of your story. So I said, yeah, okay. So they took me out to this airbase in the middle of Norfolk, former airbase in the middle of Norfolk. And I spoke to this director by the name of Joanna Hogg. And she was doing this film called Souvenir that was being funded in part and executive produced by Martin Scorsese.
Oh, wow.
And I gave her just a brief thing of my testimony. And she said, would you come on board the film and, speak to our lead actor, Tom, and speak to some of the other actors about your life and just teach them a little bit about addiction? Would you work with the art department on, how to set things up and things like that? So, and just advise me. And I said, yeah. And, she said, do you like a bit of acting? I said, well, yeah, I love improvisation. She said, well, I've got just the thing. And she had me improvise on screen, which got into the final cut of the film opposite Tilda Swinton's daughter. And then she said that all went, and I prayed with a few people on the set, and I didn't think anything of it. And she said, we'll get you back out for part 2, because it's going to be 2 parts. I turned down a cameo in Jingle Jangle.
Really?
Netflix. It was being filmed in my city, just to go and do part 2. I made a brief cameo in part 2, but I also did some advising on set. In that time, obviously I put on a lot of weight. I'm 16 and a half stone. I'm not a small fella. It's going to get a little bit darker now. I do apologise. I'll try and keep it. But this is where God comes in again. in 2017, I lost my biological mum unexpectedly of cancer. In the Easter, she was taken into the hospital on the Friday, Good Friday, and she died on the Monday. So I was absolutely heartbroken. My sister, my younger sister, was pregnant. She'd already had a baby, and she was in what we saw as a loving relationship. They were both living with mum. Had been living with mum, so they had mum's house. They'd taken over the tenancy. And my sister, 3 months later, my sister had the baby. Like not even quite 3 months. And I couldn't get up there for it, but I guess she was 2 days old when I got the phone call and saying, look, there's been an accident and you're going to read stuff on Facebook that's not going to be true. But basically, my sister had a traumatic birth, and so she was asleep upstairs, and she left her longtime partner Liam downstairs with the baby. They'd already raised one together, and she came downstairs after a few hours, and she went to pick the baby up, and the baby was limp. Mary, her name was Mary after mum, and so she called an ambulance. She said what happened. Liam said that he'd been sat on the sofa. She'd been crying. She fell off his knee and landed on the floor. The ambulance came. They said, look, there's no way that these injuries have been caused by that. They were promptly arrested. My sister proved that she was in bed. She'd been talking to my cousin on the phone, just relaxing while, they'd had a couple of sleepless nights, which is why he was downstairs with the baby. A couple of days later, it transcribed. She wouldn't stop crying, so he shook her and he beat her and he punched her. I won't go into the injuries, but they were horrific. She was on a ventilator up until she was 5 days old, and she was pronounced brain dead. Then they turned off the ventilator, and she passed. And and I hated him. I wanted to kill him. This man took this precious little thing that I'd never got a chance to see. He'd hurt my sister. He'd hurt my family. He got life with a minimum of 10 years. He could have been out now or getting out. And less than a year into his sentence, he was murdered by his cellmate over a debt, £20 drug debt, I believe it was.
He was murdered for what reason?
For what he did, but
for what he did.
They used the excuse. They used the excuse that it was a drug debt. I think they said it was. There's this thing called spice that they get in prisons. It's a highly potent drug that turns him into a zombie, basically. But so he was murdered by his cellmate in the middle of the night. And I thought, good. I hated him. I really hated him. And it took a year for us to have the funeral for Luna. He wasn't allowed a funeral either because of the legal stuff that was going on.
Yeah.
And when we finally did manage to have a funeral, I didn't want to go on my own, so one of the lead elders of my church took me. Went to the funeral, looking at this tiny pink coffin. It was just surreal. Half my family are Christian, and the other half they would call themselves Christian, and the other half are Islam. So it's kind of this mishmash of a thing. I love all my family, but I have a great relationship with some of them now. And after the funeral, I went outside and I lit a cigarette, and I felt a tap on my shoulder, and I turned around, and his mum said, thanks for coming, and put her arms around me to hug me. And I'm thinking, I hate you. I hate your husband. I hate your son. Chris came out and he's like, you all right? And I'm like, no, I need to get in the car now. I'm welling up and I'm sat in the car. And then all of a sudden, there's this calmness that comes when you hurt yourself. It only comes when, you break a bone or you hurt yourself so badly. Like when you're shouting and you're raging and then you stub your toe and you've broken something, or you punch something and you've broken something, because this calmness comes in and your body starts to go into shock. It's just instant. That was it. And I just started to cry. And Chris was like, what's going on? Can I pray for what's going on? I'm like, I've got to forgive him. He's like, what? I've got to forgive him. I said, not forgive him in the fact that, acknowledge what he's done, but know that he was a 21-year-old kid that was murdered, that made a massive mistake. Whatever was going through his head, I don't know, that he's dead and that his family don't deserve what I've been thinking. So I needed to forgive him and forgive them, basically, because I thought I needed, forgive them for. It wasn't their fault. I know that. No one could have seen what was coming. No one. I started on this journey of forgiveness, because it was for me. There's a verse, a Bible verse that's followed me pretty much my whole life. Romans 12:20. If your enemy hungers, feed him. If he thirsts, give him the best wine. For the Lord will rain down hot coals upon him. Meaning vengeance is not mine. Retribution is not mine. Retaliation is not mine. The only thing I can take hold of is forgiveness and let God do the rest for the family. Let God judge him on the day of judgment. 2020, I met a family that had lost their father to an assassin.
Wow.
He was a gangland mediator, and I started talking to them, and they were being treated really badly by a mainstream author over here, won't name him, and they wanted to get their voice across, and I knew what it was like to lose someone violently, so we wrote a book together. That was my third book, and I then fell into just praying for people and doing that, and 2020 hit.
Wow.
Lockdown, a COVID, a difficult government, some mental health issues, not able to go to church. That lasted on and off for a year. And then October 2021, I started Podcast Live and Undrugged, speaking to people like myself who had stories. And then you called me, somebody said you should become the accidental journalist, because I fell into it accidentally. I wanted to get into film, and I fell into journalism accidentally. So I became the accidental journalist. I qualified as a journalist, as I said, last year, through home learning. And it's just been kind of a journey. God's led me to some film sets. I've done a bit of acting and consulting on a few films. I played everything from drug addicts to cops to serial killers. It's kind of fun. The last film that I worked on, I got to meet a really nice guy who was a Christian, and we got talking about Christ on set, and we ended up praying for people. One of the cameramen broke his finger because I was playing a serial killer, and there was this girl on set, and she took it a bit too real and got a bit scared, and flung the door open and broke cameraman's finger. And we prayed for healing for his finger, which I never thought I'd do. It's just come from there, really. Wow. Like I say, I did the Souvenir Part 2, and I met a few people on there. And then recently I was contacted by one of the guys off that last year. I was contacted by him saying, I've written a film. I'd like you to read my script, and just, it's a very up-and-coming name in Hollywood as well. Can you read my script and let me know, about addiction and that? So I read the script, and we had a conversation on Zoom, and it was great. And then he said, I'll get in touch with you down the line. I don't take anything for granted. I'll let you know. If God wants it, he'll make it happen. And, I said, God, if you want this, you'll make it happen. I didn't hear anything. And then this Friday, 5:00, I get this text message from this guy saying, "Did you get my email?" And I'm like, "No." "Oh, well, you remember that film that I wrote? Well, we're now making it. I'm directing it. And there's some famous people involved in it." And he used the words, he said, "You are so generous with your story. I would love it if you would come and speak to the production company and speak to our lead actor and teach them about your life and tell them, your story and your testimony. This is a massive change from the person that I was 10 years ago. I'm blessed to be able to do this sometimes, where I speak to people like yourself. I've done maybe 60 podcasts all over the world on other people's podcasts. A lot of them are not Christian. I think this is my third or fourth Christian-based podcast, where I get to really delve into the person that I was and how Christ really miraculously changed my life.
Yeah.
Because I always saw church as a gallery for good people, which is why I didn't want to take him into my life. But from what I went through, I realized it was a triage for the sick, a hospital for the broken. And there is a massive redemptive power in Christ. There's a massive redemptive power in the power of testimony, and Christ uses us and our voices to carry to those that need to hear a voice or need to share a voice. And that's the journey that he's taken me on right now. I get to consult with Hollywood stars. I get to write books, but I get to take my stepson to school. I get to see my kids grow. I get to be a father, the father that I wasn't when my daughter was younger. I always tried to not let. I always had a great relationship with her. She's 16 now. She's gone through her own problems. But Christ is just the moving force in my life. I'm part of the pastoral, team when it comes to prayer. I'm part of the school of supernatural life. I'm a big part of the church. I volunteer. I believe that if we've lived a certain way of life, it is our duty, our responsibility to carry that message to others that are struggling. It's my responsibility to carry Christ to those who may not know him. Why I do things like this.
He's total redeemer.
Yeah, I went from a godless man who lived in the most godless city in England, and it was voted the most godless city in England at one point.
Wow.
To move in a town over 9 miles away, been part of this amazing community. People know me, they say hello to me. People know me on the street, they know me from my books, they know me from my podcast, and I don't take any of it for granted. God has given me the life that I thought that I would never have. He's given me a wife that I thought I would never have, a wonderfully supportive wife.
Yeah.
It's not without its challenges. My kids are neurodivergent too. My 10-year-old step boy is almost certainly autistic. It's a destructive force. It's really difficult, but we get by. I have some long-lasting effects of the life that I led before, health-wise. And I literally do live on prayer and paracetamol.
Wow.
But I live a good life.
Yeah.
A prayerful life. I pray about everything, even to the guests that I have on. And I say, God, if you want this person on, you'll make it happen. If you want me to go on this, you'll make it happen. Because I believe in a traffic light system. Sometimes it's a red and it's a no. And we don't always understand why. We might want it, we don't always understand why. Sometimes it's amber. Sometimes it's but you need to wait. And then sometimes it's yes, and it needs to be done now. Yeah. But, it's praying for discernment. These are things I do now. I pray, I pray for discernment. I don't really have any vices in my life apart from caffeine. Yeah. I drink coffee. I don't smoke. I gave up smoking. Yeah. Everything else. Coffee and biscuits, I think it is. But, the church love you when you walk in there. It's like Jack's here, and they hand you a cup of coffee. Yeah. Whether there's one going or not, they really love you and appreciate it. And I've got that family within the church that I never really had. Yeah. And just that love in Christ. And my journey is just it went from there, it's going there. Yeah. I'm a co-admin of a prison group, a former prison group, that's just about to reach 30,000 members on Facebook. Oh, wow. And that went from 21,000 just before Christmas, and it's now gone to 29,600 or something like that over the Christmas and New Year period. Awesome. Just offering each other support. Yeah. Offering, advice about trauma and, being informed in trauma and just not falling into the old habits and getting yourself put back there.
So what's some advice that you would give listeners that might be struggling with addiction, your early stages of life, and they know it's bad and they've been standing at those crossroads like you, with knowing that they got that addiction, they've got that, they want to follow Christ, they know that it's the right thing, but then they want the option to be able to, continue in the world? What's some advice for those kind of people?
That you might think that God's not listening, but He is. You might think God's not helping, but He does. You've got to ask Him. You can't just expect to ask. You might think that everything is falling down and all these worldly things are on your shoulders and that your back's going to break and you're going to fail and fall. You might be suffering trauma and grief.
Yeah.
There's one thing that will get you through it, and that is hope. And you can find that hope in Jesus Christ.
So good.
Because He brings that. You might feel like the worst person in the world for what you've done. But when Christ was crucified, when He was put on that cross, He wrote a check with His life. And when He died, He paid it in full for our sins. So no matter what you've done, God knows what you've done, and He knows what you're going to do.
Yeah.
But to hand your will and your life over to God, to accept Christ into your life, it's going to be one of the biggest decisions that you'll ever make. And it's not always going to be easy, because I don't get to be naughty. But you can be, I had somebody ask me, can I still drink, or can I still, smoke a spliff or whatever? And I'm like, well, yeah, but God changes you. Christ changes you. So if that's a problem in your life, then God will highlight that.
Well, it's not.
We make choices. We weren't made to be, we were made with free will. And the reason we were made with free will is because we make our own choices. And it's our choice. God is there all the time.
Yeah.
And I can tell you exactly what hell is now. Knowing God exists and not having Him in your life.
Yeah. I always say it like, how do you honor Jesus for what He did?
Yeah.
It's not that you can't do certain things, but how do you honor Him? Are you honoring Him with what He did for you on that cross? If you go back into drugs and things like that, or are you taking it for granted? And that's where the relationship comes in. If you got a relationship with your husband or your wife, and you do, nobody's got the perfect marriage, but you filter your marriage through an honor system. How do I be the best husband or the best wife for the other person? And it's, I'm going to drop the ball every now and again, but as long as I'm not doing it on purpose constantly, that I'm showing that I really want this relationship, which is the relationship with Christ. I really want this relationship, and that's through, I believe, honoring what He actually did. Is it's not that doing those things are going to stop you from getting into heaven, but doing those things will show that you might not necessarily have a relationship with Christ, or you need to deepen that relationship with Christ. And the more you deepen it, the less you're going to want to do those things. Man.
Yeah. And, it is the relationship that I wanted, and I've pursued relationship with God because I needed that father. I now understand what adoption is. I didn't really understand what adoption was, and how it sort of affected me as a person, as a Christian. I've learned from father figures within the church. It's just like I've become more of what Christ wants rather than... I'm not saying I don't make selfish decisions. I'm human. I'm not saying I don't ever lie, because that would be a lie.
Ironically.
Even to myself. And I don't always go into things with the best intentions, and sometimes it's selfish intentions. But then God points that out. And He really does. He can change your life. I've got a real heart for films with redemptive stories. A few of them from your way, like Once We're Warriors and What Becomes of the Broken Hearted. And the story of Jake the Muss and how he went from violent alcoholic to a guy trying to get his son out of the gangs. That sort of redemptive arc. And I do believe in redemption. Don't often do this, but I wrote a poem that came in the book that I put in the book after I met Christ at the end of my hospital bed, and I'd like to share it with you.
Yeah, go for it.
Listeners, if that's okay. And it might just sort of reiterate what I've kind of been saying, and then I'll finish on that. If you like. It's called debts. I had a debt I could not pay, yet the slate was wiped clean so I could live my life today. A debt so big that money could not clear, only the pain of a man who died without fear. And since man is broken, the only way it could be done was for a father to send himself as his son. So there he was, for a debt that was ours, on a hill in Golgotha, nailed to a tree. He took all of that sin and slowly suffocated for you and for me. And as the blood fell from his hands, feet, and head, he yelled 3 words: "It is finished." And then he was dead. By his death, he put in a guaranteed check, the wages of sin paid by his death. So how do we access life where we are no longer in debt with sin? Simply by just believing in him.
Wow, that's amazing. That's the gospel right there, listeners. If you weren't quite sure what it is, that's just go back and re-listen to that a few times. Wow, that is written so well. Wow. Man, Jack, your life is full of trials and tribulations and redemption, and then more trials, and then more redemption. And you have been constantly molded and shaped and shown every step of the way that it's created a character in you and the ability for you to be able to relate to different people throughout life that I believe is going to be your best weapon of evangelism for what God can do. He doesn't just look for the righteous. He's got his eyes on the broken. And, what does the Bible say? Jesus says a doctor doesn't come for the able-bodied, he comes for the sick. And that we're all sick, we're all needing the great physician of Jesus. And I just love how your story really captivates that really well. So thank you so much, Jack, for joining us on the Jesus Magnet podcast. For all of our listeners, please be sure to check out Jack's podcast, Live and Undrugged, and it's be in the description below, so we'll make it nice and easy to find. And also, Jack, we're going to add in some of your books and things like that, or the ability to be able to purchase them. We'll make sure that they're in the description below. So thank you, everybody, for joining us on this episode of the Jesus Magnet podcast. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Jesus Magnet podcast. If you enjoyed this, make sure that you connect with us. Find us on Facebook, on Instagram, and if you want to support us, be a member of our coffee club, Jesus Magnet Coffee Club. See you next time on the Jesus Magnet.